So I'm curious, what are some of the common themes the youth of today share with you is important to them when looking for roles?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question. I think even without getting into specifics of what they want from a role, the logistics, I think Gen Z candidates, they have super high expectations for their current or future employers, for organizations. I think they see us as an important vehicle who can have an impact on issues such as diversification, social impact, environmental issues, sustainability, etc. And they feel we have a massive kind of span of influence. They feel whether that's through personal development, whether it's through employee workload, our products and services towards our customers. Yeah, I've seen them make decisions solely based on the kind of ethical values of a company. And when I say they deep dive, they deep dive. They will look to see if what you're saying you're committing to is actually committed to action in the operations of your business. I would say from a granular perspective, they want a clear development plan. They want a company that, well, I think in many instances, I've seen a lot of companies do a lot of work around front loading, trying to put all their time and money into finding the best candidates. But with this generation, the kind of brand, the business of the benefits is no longer enough. They want an internal mobility route for themselves so that they can see there is a future path here of continuous learning. They can get meaningful work. And yeah, I think that's really crucial for them in this stage of their career. I think the one bit to call out is they are very entrepreneurial. I think Forbes has said around 54% of the people are entrepreneurial. They want this meaningful work where they're trusted with responsibility on special projects, where they'll have an impact, where they'll develop skills and keep learning. I think 1 in 5 Gen Z candidates would stay at an employer they were teetering on leaving if they offer them a chance to upskill. So that's really crucial for their next gen, is to see that there is a continuous learning path and a future for them in that business.
What would you consider being some of the major factors influencing youth unemployment?
I think it's a really big discussion point. I think unemployment is certainly up and down over the last few years. I think the recessional activity is really making it difficult. COVID obviously was not helpful. There was a lot of postponed internships and graduate programs, etc., etc. I think the challenge with youth unemployment right now, and something they've really got to face, is the fact that sometimes an intern or a grad coming in is seen as a continuous improvement for a business. It's kind of seen as a bit of a value add type addition to a business rather than a necessity. So for me, I've always seen early careers hires as the bedrock, the foundation of a business. You've got these people with new ideas, technologically minded, and brought up in this technology first world. But they have been brought up in a pandemic. They have spent a lot of their final studies in a virtual environment. And where businesses are now going through a real transition, a position of change, sometimes that they will go for the experienced hires. They will not have the time to ride the storm and bring in the early careers hires, and I think that's kind of where it's wrong. In the media, kind of in the press, you probably see it quite a lot. For some reason, one of the things that's really hindering youth unemployment at the minute is the fact that we're getting sucked into a lot of terminology around things like Mickey Mouse degrees, or should you go to uni, should you not go to uni, should you do an apprenticeship, what is the point of doing certain things, etc., etc. So many people have these differing views. There's also stuff around paid internships and youth expectations and behaviors, and unfortunately this negative association isn't fair, it isn't correct, but it is there, and it is kind of generating some of these incorrect perceptions of youth employment. But one thing I would say is I talked about entrepreneurship, and I think there is a whole group of people in this population, and I have spoken to business leaders in the past who see that as a bit of a fear factor, because they maybe think to themselves, do I want to bring somebody in who's then going to run off and go and start their own business or create something of their own? And it's a bit like, I think past that. I think past what an entrepreneur is. If that person has that ability, they've got critical thinking, strategic planning, and hard work and dedication, usually strong comms, probably good in sales, probably very creative. I could go on and on and on. But the reality of the situation is that if they do leave to start their own business, for some, it can be a side hustle alongside their kind of core employment. Or if they do formally leave, and this is the bit where maybe I differ, but if that is in 2, 3, 5 or 10 years, I'm looking at that and going, that's 2 to 3 to 5 years of a budding entrepreneur that you have in your business, someone that's got this really innovative way of thinking. It's about finding a role for them and convincing them to stay in your organization. So I think that's one of the biggest factors as well, is that there's these little groups that are appearing and they're putting companies off employing, but the reality is they need to become the bedrock of their businesses.
I read a report from the World Economic Forum that suggests in 2022, almost 1 in 4 of all young people were not in education, employment, or training. So that's known as NEET status. And the youth NEET rate jumped to its highest in almost 15 years. So as a consequence, young people may not see their labor market opportunities and their outcomes deteriorate in the longer term. What role do you think businesses should play in opening opportunities for these NEET youth when looking for internships or entry-level jobs? Or do you think that responsibility should fall elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a concern, I think, as you say, 25% of people impacted. I think even higher levels in extremely poor, kind of fragile economic countries. We do have an impact for sure. I think it'll be kind of ill-advised to not say we do. So do policymakers, so do local authorities. I think even what sits behind that 25% number is that there's an even bigger difference in terms of the gender differentiation between within that network. I think 15% difference between kind of male and female alone in terms of report figures. So that was supposed to be kind of averse, I suppose, by bringing in the platinum economy. So the digitalization was something which was going to help protect that, but obviously, as we know, there may still be a reduction in jobs around that. But for me, it's about going right to the core of the education. Something I'm really passionate about. I think the education doesn't always match for those young people at that point in their career. I think their behaviors or their interests don't align. They maybe had less access through their kind of parental network or their opportunities as they grew up. We need to kind of desperately increase the awareness of more roles and more careers. Just because someone never related to Macbeth or Pythagoras doesn't mean they're unemployable. Obviously, sorry to the mathematics wizards and the readers, but that's a fact. I think, how do we better showcase these hidden and potentially skill short sectors, or open our doors to more opportunities for people to live the day in the life of a global program head, for example, or a transformation manager? How do we get these roles that are not talked about enough? There are people coming out of education, even at graduate level, your kind of liberal arts students, your journalists, your graphic designers, for example, struggling to get work, but are they ever told that, you know what, that's a very useful skill set to have to be a UX designer, for example? I don't think they are. If you're really interested in sustainability, like we see in the media very often that a lot of young people are, why aren't we getting them into things like solar panels and energy management? And these are the things that they are just simply not as aware of coming through education. And I just think that's kind of on us to do something with that. I think, can they, as educational institutions, revise the curriculum? Does that sit with us employers? I've worked with these education institutions before. They are very hardworking. They care so much, but they are huge institutions with massive student bases, and they're struggling to give them this kind of advice. It's really, really difficult for them to do so. But I think between businesses and education, we need to think outside the norm. There's something that's kind of really interesting for me. A couple of little bits I would look at personally. One, which would be, is can we use the likes of AI to give people a feel of what jobs are like going for education, what it's like to be in an office, what it's like to be going out fitting a solar panel fitter, whatever it may be. Is there something we can do to give them a taste of these different jobs? And then the second bit is something I worked on a little bit over the last couple of years, which is trying to connect with the Guardian network, the parental network, reach out to these groups of high influence people who are trying to advise their children in terms of what to do next, and maybe just simply haven't had access themselves. Like, how can we help them to then invigorate these jobs and find the meaningful, gratifying roles out there? The likes of healthcare and catering, food and drink, bedrocks of our society, but they're now struggling to find people. We need to find ways to kind of counter that in many respects. That would be the main thing I would look at, to be honest.